Bart Ehrman strongly rejects the core Christian belief, the empty tomb, the veracity of Jesus' resurrection, which is the cornerstone of the Christian faith. In his conversation with Alex O'Connor, he made this bold claim.
I don't know of any instance where we have a verified account of anybody being buried on the afternoon of their crucifixion in a known tomb. So, how likely is it that they made an exception in the case of Jesus?
For those who are unfamiliar with Bart Ehrman, he is an atheist New Testament scholar. He specialized in the New Testament textual criticism, and he has published several controversial popular books. Recently, he was interviewed by Alex O'Connor, another young atheist YouTuber. They talked about various things, and the conversation turned to Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. Bart Ehrman made it very clear he doesn't think the empty tomb accounts in the New Testament are real. He makes this claim that Jesus wasn't buried at all in the first place. In this brief episode, let's go over Bart Ehrman's reasoning, why he thinks that the empty tomb narratives in the New Testament was a later invention, and that Jesus was never buried in the tomb. First, we will watch his reasoning, and then we will go on to clarify it in view of history, archaeology, and scripture. Welcome to Discern Scripture YouTube channel. We post videos regularly on various topics that are related to the biblical world, its history, and its present relevance. We would really appreciate if you subscribe and help us reach a wider audience. Now, let's get on with the video. There are several comments one could make about Bart Ehrman's conversation with Alex O'Connor. I want to limit my thoughts to two things: his conflating of Jesus' resurrection with Greco-Roman myths, and his case against the burial of Jesus in tomb after his crucifixion. Let's go on to the first one. Resurrection is not unique. So his argument is this: resurrection stories were common in the ancient world.
Is that we have a few facts about Jesus that we can pretty confidently say are true. Firstly, that a man called Jesus existed and was sort of going around teaching an ethical code of sorts and gaining followers, got into disrepute with the Roman authorities, was killed by crucifixion, and that afterwards groups of people claim to have seen him. Do you think that all of these facts are sort of well established?
Yes.
So given that, how do we explain the fact that all of these are true at the same time?
Oh, well, I don't see any trouble at all. We have other figures in history for whom we have things like that, with those four facts. I mean, Romulus, the founder of Rome, I don't know if he was a historical figure or not, but people thought he was, and he certainly ended up somehow leaving the earth, and people, there were eyewitnesses saying that they saw him alive afterwards.
I mean, do we have sort of, firstly, are the sources as reliable? Are they as well attested? Do we have multiple?
Now that's another question. See, that's not one of your four things.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm asking about is when we say that these facts are well established.
Well, Livy, the historian Livy, so he's a Roman historian, and he reports that. Or Apollonius of Tyana. We have eyewitness testimony to his being raised from the dead.
What eyewitness testimony are we talking about? Like who is it that claims
followers of his?
Bart Ehrman goes on to say that the claims to the resurrection of Jesus was not unique in the ancient world. There were several other people claiming to be resurrected and seen afterwards. He provides two specific examples: Romulus and Apollonius. Let's analyze his claims one by one. Romulus. The city of Rome was said to be founded in 753 BC, in the 8th century. Romulus was Rome's legendary founder and the first king. There are different accounts of Romulus' death. Some suggested that he was murdered by his political rivals, while others proposed that he was killed in a conspiracy or a coup. According to Roman historian Livy in his work Ab Urbe Condita, from the founding of the city, Romulus disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. In Livy's narrative, Romulus was holding a public assembly when a sudden storm arose. During the tumult of the storm, Romulus was said to have been enveloped in the cloud and taken up to the heavens, leaving the Romans in awe and uncertainty about his fate. Some interpreted this event as Romulus' divine ascension or apotheosis, but others speculated about more natural explanations, such as political intrigue or assassination. There is no resurrection in this myth of Romulus. This myth of Romulus doesn't specifically talk about the resurrection incident of Romulus at all. Now, why did Bart Ehrman present this as an equivalent evidence of Jesus' resurrection? Romulus disappeared in a storm, gone. He never came back alive or appeared to his followers and presented himself alive and sent them on a mission to preach the message of his resurrection to the entire world. That is definitely not the case. Another important distinction is that Roman historian Livy wrote this work of the founding of Rome 8 centuries after the events supposedly took place. He was not at all connected to Romulus, never have seen Romulus, and couldn't have. The gap between the death of Romulus and the records of Livy are 800 years, 8 centuries. In the case of Jesus' resurrection, the New Testament documents were written by Jesus' own disciples in their lifetime, in just a few years or decades after the events of resurrection. They lived with Jesus and walked with him during his earthly ministry. They were eyewitnesses to the event of resurrection. On closer scrutiny, Romulus' case for resurrection is simply made up by Bart Ehrman. It's not even there in the work of the Roman historian. Now let's go on to the next example of Bart Ehrman. Apollonius of Tyana. Apollonius of Tyana was a Greek philosopher, a mystic, a magician, and a shadowy figure. He was said to have been born around AD 15 to 20 in Tyana, a town in Cappadocia, Asia Minor, which is in modern-day Turkey. Much later, a Greek writer named Philostratus was commissioned by the Romans to write a fictionalized novel on the life of Apollonius. It's titled The Life of Apollonius of Tyana. Philostratus presents Apollonius as a wandering philosopher who traveled extensively throughout the Mediterranean and Near East. Now to the question, did he resurrect after his death? Philostratus presents Apollonius as a miracle worker, but a specific account of his resurrection is not mentioned in any of the writings. So we wonder if Apollonius' resurrection is not found in his primary biography, and where did Bart Ehrman get the information? Why did Bart Ehrman go on to compare Apollonius to Jesus' resurrection? Also, when did Apollonius live, and when was the biographical account of Apollonius written? Well, again, we can see the written biography of Apollonius was written some 200 years after his life. His own disciples did not leave any records. Philostratus was not the disciple of Apollonius, and he never met him. Most important thing is the 2nd century context of this writing. Christianity was surging in the 2nd century despite all the Roman persecutions against the Christians. So the Romans officially commissioned Philostratus to compose a fictional biography of Apollonius of Tyana. Philostratus wrote this romanticized fictional novel on the life of Apollonius at the request of Empress Julia Domna, the wife of the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus. Perhaps the Romans wanted to promote Apollonius as alternative to Jesus Christ in the Roman Empire. The accounts of Philostratus comes 2 centuries after Christianity and are heavily dependent on the Gospels, particularly the Gospel of Luke. This has been pointed out by several historians and scholars. Yet Bart Ehrman would simply throw this as a comparable example to show that resurrection accounts were common in the ancient world. Bart twists and distorts ancient records to make the resurrection claims of Jesus look as if it was not unique. In short, the records about Romulus and Apollonius of Tyana are mythological and quasi-fictional. They were written hundreds of years afterwards. They were not written by eyewitnesses or contemporaries. In the case of Romulus and Apollonius, there were no post-resurrection appearances. They were simply made up by Bart Ehrman. And on close scrutiny, both of his examples don't have anything in common with the resurrection of Jesus. No similarity whatsoever. John Alsop, an eminent New Testament scholar, this is what he says. Neither the myths of Osiris, Adonis, Attis, and Tammuz, nor apotheosis stories of Apollonius of Tyana, Romulus, Aristeas, and others nor cultic practices concerning Asclepius and Apuleius, once examined, are the same form as the resurrection appearance stories of the Gospels. It only further strengthens the Christian view that resurrection is an unique event, historically attested by the contemporaries of Christ himself, who lived, preached, and died for their belief in the risen Christ, whom they have seen with their eyes and touched with their hands. Now let's move on to the second point, Bart Ehrman's denial of Jesus' burial after the crucifixion in a tomb. No tomb burial for Jesus.
Was there an empty tomb? There are very big problems with thinking there was a tomb at all. He's presupposing that the gospel story is right, that Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus the afternoon he was crucified and put him in a family tomb, and on the third day, women came and found the tomb empty. Okay, so what is our evidence of it? Well, the evidence, of course, is only in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They say that. And it was the tradition that Christians had had for a very long time. So it's certainly the Christian tradition. But there are lots of reasons for doubting that it's right. What do Romans do with crucified victims? So we have records of, we don't have lots of records. I mean, one of the really interesting things that people don't realize, we have no literary description of a crucifixion from the ancient world. Like, nobody describes how they did it. Like, were they typically nailed? We know they were nailed sometimes because we have some nails that with DNA on, and we've got that organic material on them. Were they tied? Were they crossbeams? Were they stakes? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff we don't really know. We do have a number of references to what Romans did once the person died on their crosses. And the accounts are consistent that what they did is they left them on their crosses as part of the humiliation.
Yes.
That they would decompose on the cross and be attacked by scavengers. And so we have off-the-cuff remarks in a number of sources that that's just what they did. And so there are debates about that. We can have debates about whether that happened within Judaism or not. People say, yeah, Jews didn't allow that. It's absolutely right. Jews didn't allow it. But the Jews weren't killing him. The Romans were killing him. I don't know of any instance where we have a verified account of anybody being buried on the afternoon of their crucifixion in a known tomb. So how likely is it that they made an exception in the case of Jesus? I mean, we think they would because, he's the Son of God, and so he's exceptional.
In short, his observation, Romans didn't let the crucified persons buried. His conclusion, Jesus was not buried after crucifixion. So the implication is early Christian belief in the empty tomb is not historical. In a nutshell, this is what Bart Ehrman is saying. He has written about this in his book, How Jesus Became God, years ago. For years, I had thought, whatever else we think about the stories of Jesus' resurrection, we could be relatively certain that immediately after his death, he was given a decent burial by Joseph of Arimathea, and that on the third day, some of his female followers found his tomb empty. I no longer think that these are relatively certain historical data. On the contrary, I think both views, his burial and his empty tomb, are unlikely. He also goes on to say this, the point of crucifixion was to torture and humiliate a person as fully as possible and to show any bystanders what happens to someone who is a troublemaker in the eyes of Rome. Part of the humiliation and the degradation was the body being left on the cross after death to be subject to scavenging animals. He questions, why would Romans allow Jesus to be buried in a tomb? Why would Romans make an exception for Jesus? Allowing Jesus to be given a decent burial is contrary to the whole point of crucifixion. A decent burial is precisely the kind of dignified treatment that the crucifixion is explicitly designed to deny. So Bart Ehrman goes on to perpetuate this line of faulty reasoning in his books and interviews. I would like to argue against his initial observation itself and show that strong evidence to the contrary exists. The central problem is that Ehrman generalizes about crucifixion. It is true that crucifixion was intended to be a total humiliating execution of those that stood against the might of Rome. Usually, crucified victims were left on the cross to die a slow and agonizing death. And so when Bart Ehrman says that Romans generally left the bodies on the cross, it is partially true. However, Bart Ehrman does not take into consideration how Romans were flexible to consider the religious sentiments of a particular community and adjusted their crucifixion strategy accordingly. Jews had this deep belief that leaving the crucified on the cross overnight would desecrate the land. We can see this in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 23. If a man has committed a sin deserving death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on the tree, his body shall not remain overnight on the tree, but you shall surely bury him that day, so that you do not defile the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. For he who is hanged is accursed of God. We have historical records from the ancient times that tell us that the Romans allowed the bodies of the crucified to be taken down for burial before sundown. Ehrman probably knows this, yet he chooses to ignore and downplay it. Ancient historical records on the burial of crucified victims. Roman law regarding the burial of the executed is far more nuanced and lenient than Bart Ehrman assumes. We have few historical records, the work of Josephus from the 1st century and the Roman legal compilation known as Digesta from the 6th century. First, let's go to Josephus. In Josephus' works such as Against Apian, Book 2, Section 73 and Book 2, Section 221, he makes it clear that the Romans, particularly during peace times, did not force the local to break their local laws and traditions.